At its heart, Tales of Arise is an exploration of human nature and what it means to live unshackled. It explores several nuances of this: free will and subjugation, grief and hatred, love and sacrifice, just to name a few. As such, it is no surprise that these nuances are key to the development of the core party members, both as instigators for their past regrets and concepts to consider as they find new paths forward. Tales of Arise does not only ask us to consider the nature of these concepts, but also uses them as a means to explore the question of what comes after. For Law and Rinwell, there are several key themes which tie their character arcs together. This video will aim to explore how facing these difficult concepts allows Law and Rinwell to surpass their past regrets and to push each other to find new purpose in their lives. To do that, of course, we will need to thoroughly discuss the plot of Tales of Arise, so naturally this video will contain spoilers for the entire game. I would strongly recommend playing or watching through the game before watching this video. In any case, I hope you enjoy it. Throughout the world of Dana, hatred is rife. This is, of course, natural. The Danans have built up 3 centuries worth of resentment at the Renans for their enslavement and oppression, and the Renans have been bred with a superiority complex over Danans simply to enable the continued existence of the crown contest. For the most part, the game makes it clear that hatred is a vice. However, that does not mean the core party members are clear of hatred's grasp. For Law and Rinwell, hatred is a huge influence in the beginning of their arcs. For Law, hatred stems from anger. First, it is aimed towards his father, Zephyr. Law ran away from home because of a grudge against Zephyr, who seemed to value his work as a resistance leader over his family. The last straw was the death of Law's mother, which Zephyr was not present for. Though the audience are by this point aware that Zephyr only left to find medicine for his wife, Law was left in the dark, unsupported and supposedly abandoned. It's no surprise then that his anger and loneliness would lead to his running away into Sislodia in an attempt to get away from his father and everything he lost in Calaglia. But even in Sislodia, Law continues to lose what's important to him. The resistance group he joins are butchered in front of him, and he surrenders and ends up becoming a snake-eye just to survive. No matter how much resentment he might feel towards the Renans for having killed his friends, however, it does not change the situation he has found himself in, not so long as he cannot do anything to break out of it. As such, his anger only builds up, reaching a boiling point when he encounters his father by chance in Messia 224. Law's hatred almost drives him to kill Zephyr. He would have, had a blast of magic from Rinwell not stopped him in his tracks. But it is that impulsive intervention that gives Law the opportunity to hear what his father has to say, and to change his perspective on him. That doesn't mean his anger disappears. When his father later dies, it's the same hatred which gives Law the strength to defeat Ganabelt and to claim his vengeance. However, with both his father and Ganabelt gone, Law's hatred no longer has a target. He is left purposeless, with the pain and regret filling his heart taking place of the burnt-out hatred it used to hold. In essence, though hatred is what gives Law the strength to keep fighting, it also becomes a crutch he's overly reliant on. As such, when all targets for his hatred are gone, Law has nothing left to lean on. The only thing left for him to hate is himself, due to his past regrets and feelings of powerlessness and lack of purpose. As for Rinwell, her situation is startlingly similar. From the very beginning, it is painfully obvious that Rinwell is filled with hatred. She is not subtle about her distaste for Renans, though she noticeably has no Danans she is close to either, with Hootle, a Danan owl, being her only friend. And in all fairness, over the course of the game, we come to understand and sympathise with Rinwell's reasons for hating Renans so deeply. After all, she lost her entire family to a Renan lord's cruelty. The vague memory of the lord who killed her family quickly becomes the symbol of everything Renan to her, and her hatred grows to encompass all Renans, who she assumes are all the same. Her experience of Renan oppression immediately following this likely doesn't help, considering the necessity of deceit and subterfuge in daily life in Sisselden. That hatred pushes her forward, granting her the strength to use her magic in the fight against the lords, if only because she wants desperately to find the one who murdered her family. Law and Rinwell's experiences of hatred and vengeance are intentionally similar. By setting this up, it further highlights the differences between the two of them as characters. For example, in the case of Law, he runs away from the initial object of his hatred, Zephyr, in order to escape the pain and anger he feels. In contrast, Rinwell chooses to directly face her enemy, intentionally joining the Silver Swords to give herself a better chance of one day finding and fighting the Lord of Sislodia, who she naturally suspects to be the one who killed her family. And even once Rinwell realises that Ganabelt did not kill her parents, Rinwell chooses to travel alongside Alphen and the others, knowing it is a guaranteed way to face the remaining lords and hopefully find her target. In addition to this, the scope of their hatred differs. Despite the depth of his anger toward his father and Ganabelt, Law's hatred is very focused. He does not blame others who are uninvolved for the pain he has experienced. This is most likely a product of his upbringing. By the time we meet Law, it is clear that Zephyr has clear morals and an open mind, encouraging the party to focus not on getting revenge, but on liberating those who cannot fight for themselves. At one point, he even makes it clear to Rinwell that nothing will be gained by blaming all Renans for the lives Dannans currently must live. It's easy to see how he might have passed this kind of wisdom on to Law throughout his childhood, and as such, it's no surprise that Law doesn't tend to resent the other Renans they come across, including their Renan party members. Rinwell, however, has a much tougher time dealing with her hatred. This might be due to her isolation following the loss of her family. She did not have anyone to support her or guide her through her grief, and without that, there is nothing to stop her pain from consuming her. She fixates on hatred to the extent that it becomes her only reason for living. In her own words, the fantasy of vengeance is the only thing that's kept her going all this time. Consciously or not, Rinwell knows that without that hatred, she'd be just as purposeless as Law was following his own vengeance against Ganabelt. Both Law and Rinwell also use hatred towards others as a means of distracting themselves from the guilt they feel deep down. After all, when their enemies are out of the picture, both Law and Rinwell blame themselves for what happened in their pasts. Law regrets running away from home and constantly wonders whether he could have done anything to stop his father from dying, and he constantly has nightmares regarding his survivor's guilt from the attack on the resistance group he joined in Zaslodia. When he first joins the party, he is intent on training himself constantly to become stronger, telling Alfin that he doesn't want anyone else to die because of him. He resents the choices he made in the past, and his guilt pushes him to try to avoid making those same mistakes in the future. As for Rinwell, she unwittingly led Almeidrea to the place where her family lived, thus revealing them and allowing Almeidrea the opportunity to attack. She holds this guilt inside of her for most of the game, without revealing it until her bond deepens enough with Alfin at camp that she feels safe opening up to him about it. Some part of her truly believes that she is the reason her family, and in addition, every other known mage, were wiped out. Part of Rinwell's early fixation on hatred likely allowed her a distraction from the guilt she felt, although as she confesses to Alfin, she sometimes wondered whether she even had the right to get revenge considering her past mistakes. However, Rinwell's resentment towards herself runs deeper than her guilt, sparking from her conflicting feelings about her own identity and her internalized hatred of so-called monsters. Generally speaking, there are a few different uses for the word monster. Perhaps the most relevant to this discussion is its use in describing a person of repulsively unnatural character, or exhibiting such extreme cruelty or wickedness as to appear inhuman, a monstrous example of evil, of vice, etc. It's not difficult to think of a few examples of such a monster in Tales of Arise, but there are two who are particularly important to the development of Rinwell and Law's arcs in particular. The first of these is Deadheim, the leader of the Darkwings. He is spoken of as a hero throughout Niez, known most prominently for his driving the Lord of Mahag-Sar out of her castle and into hiding. His actions are ostensibly in the name of Danan liberation. He even takes inspiration from Danan folklore in his desire to be a hero like the protagonist of the story he borrowed the name the Darkwings from. However, power and hatred corrupt Deadheim. As he gets closer to taking Almeidrea out, his methods begin to disregard even the lives of other Danans, and he uses bombs on his own people to drive the Renans out of Niez. He essentially rules over Niez as a dictator, eschewing any criticism of his views and insisting on his absolute power. In essence, with his initial purpose of vengeance against Almeidrea close to fruition, he forgets the reasons he took up the role of a resistance leader in the first place. His sole purpose becomes hatred and vengeance. Considering his personality and blatant disregard for human lives, it is easy to call Deadheim a monster. After all, he loses all reason and critical judgment, showing no sympathy or empathy even to the families of the Danans he killed. And yet, even after all he does, he still runs a successful personality cult, where he is revered for his so-called heroism. Essentially, he becomes the true monster in Niez, with a pack of loyal subjects willing to hold him on the highest pedestal, all due to their shared hatred and desire for vengeance. Of course, that is not to say he is the only monster in Niez. Lord Almeidrea Chineris can doubtlessly be described in much the same way. She shares the same disregard for human life that Deadheim does, although her allegiances naturally fall more on the Renan side than the Danan. well. That is not to say she respects Renan lives much more, of course. After all, she killed her own family members in order to become a lord in the crown contest. Though we do not know much information about her upbringing, we learn on Lenegis that there have not been many female lords in the crown contest, and that Almeidrea was not the most proficient astral artist in her family. From this, we can infer that she was desperate to prove herself and to be recognised on her own merits, rather than being overshadowed by her male family members. That desperation led to her taking drastic measures to earn lordship prior to the crown contest. In essence, the resentment she felt toward her own family drove her to kill them, just to prove herself as worthy. With this in mind, she's not so different from Deadime. They both want power above all else, even if it means forsaking the things which may once have been important to them. In addition to all of this, however, Almeidrea has a strong association with the more traditional definition of monster, i.e. a mythical creature which is part animal and part human, or combines elements of two or more animal forms, and is frequently of great size and ferocious appearance. This is obvious even from her physical appearance. The white and gold section of her dress may carry the same colour scheme and patterning as can be found on many other Renan outfits we see, but she accessorises it with a purple collar which resembles the frill of a lizard, and the back of which spikes up like a tail. There is also a gold spine-like detailing on her back, and that's not to mention how her dress appears to fall away to reveal a skin-tight black bodysuit underneath, which almost resembles scales in how it is segmented. On top of all of this, she wears a horn on one side of her head, an obvious allusion to monstrosity. Her choice in fashion reflects her deep interest in the study and creation of Zeugles. It's heavily implied that the information she stole from Rinwell's mage clan helped her to develop her research into creating strong Zeugles. It's possible that she may even be the creator of many of the large and gigant-string Zeugles that the party fights as they traverse Dana, including, but not limited to, the dragon and lizard-type Zeugles seen in the Aedan Lake, and the Zeugles trapped in the Estaluva forest where she once conducted her experiments. We also learn on her fortress ship that she dedicated much time and research specifically to create Mesmold, the giant dragon Zeugle the party faces alongside her on the deck of the ship. What we can glean from this is that Almeidrea embraces the idea of monstrosity. She does not regret her inhuman actions, nor does she shy away from committing further atrocities. She allies herself with Zeugles rather than honing her own skills with astral arts, and her appearance reflects how she has descended into monstrosity, allowing it to become her identity. In the case of Rinwell, however, monstrosity is far less welcome. From the beginning, Rinwell resents her magic and her status as a Danan mage. She grew up as part of a clan of Danan mages who hid their powers in order to avoid persecution, the likes of which her kind endured for centuries, even before the Great Conquest. Having grown up this way, being a mage remains a major part of Rinwell's identity, a defining feature of her ancestry and her sense of self. And yet, the same astral arts that mages are gifted with being able to use are the same arts which define their oppressors, the Renans. Where the slur used for Danans reduces them to vessels carrying the precious astral energy which the Renans are harvesting, the slur for Renans defines them by the way their eyes glow when they use magic. The mere association of astral arts with Renans creates fear and apprehension in most Danans. Naturally so, considering how they've only been used in the name of destruction and genocide towards Danans, and all for the sake of a meaningless contest. Mages are seen as monsters. To the Renans, they are the work of fairy tales and legends. To the Danans, they are a wicked combination of ordinary Danan appearance and the perceived monstrosity of magic. Growing up the way she did, Rinwell spent her childhood learning that she is different from others, and that she needed to hide it to survive, or else she may be killed the way her ancestors were. Is it any surprise, then, that she came to resent her magic and by proxy her identity? From what her childhood has taught her, she is a monster simply by virtue of being a mage. Considering the definitions discussed earlier, she may associate this with an inherent nature that her magic can only be used to cause chaos and destruction, the same way the Renans do and the same way any monster might. Not to mention how she wields the same astral arts that the people she resents the most, the Renans, and particularly Almeidrea, are defined by. This idea is pushed even further by Rinwell having a particular affinity toward wind astral arts, which Almeidrea is also deeply associated with, by virtue of being the Lord of Wind. It's no wonder that she is so easily riled up when Almeidrea taunts her, telling her she is just like her. In addition to the pain and grief of watching her family be butchered simply so Almeidrea can steal their knowledge, Rinwell's hatred towards Almeidrea is a reflection of the resentment she feels toward herself. But Rinwell is not a monster. In order to understand that, she needs a guiding light, someone who is willing to reach their hand out to her and accept her, magic and all. Before we discuss Rinwell, however, we should first return to Law, as he plays an essential role in Rinwell's character development which first necessitates his own development. We meet Law at his lowest point, purposeless, filled with hatred but unable to fight back, reduced to a tool for the Renans in his work as a Snake Eye. He has no allies or friends, and he has rejected his only remaining family. Then, in Sisselden, his father is sentenced to a public execution. It takes the words of Alfin to convince Law to give his father one last chance, to listen to what Zephyr has to say. Alfin explains to Law the influence Zephyr has had in his life, and how he truly believes that Zephyr cares for Law, despite what happened before Law ran away. The mixed feelings in Law's heart are what convince him to hide nearby during the execution, where he hears the words which will stick with him for the rest of his life.
Mistakes, huh? Where to start? I've made so many in my life that I've lost count. All my life I've had to fight, but I have known nothing but loss. I was so caught up in the struggle to survive in this world that I ended up neglecting my own family. I have lost so many good friends. I even lost my wife and my son. I'll never be able to fix these mistakes, not a single one.
It sounds to me as if the greatest mistake of your life was never learning to stay down when you were beaten.
A good man once told me if I take up this fight, I'd have to pay a price. Turns out he was right. After all, the very people and things I was fighting to protect the most were payment. I don't regret keeping up the fight for a second. But still, not a single day goes by when I do not think about what I have lost. Not telling others how much they truly meant to me before it was too late. That is your answer. That's the greatest mistake of my life. Do yourselves a favor and never become like me. Don't continue to make the same mistakes until it's too late to fix them. Ask yourself what it is you couldn't bear to lose. What do you want to protect with all of your might? Then hold on and never let go!
That's quite enough.
Listen to that voice deep inside of you. Together, no wall can hold you back. And the same goes for the ones the Lord made you build inside your own hearts.
Above all else, Zephyr's words are a confession and an apology. Though he ends them with a plea for the Danans to continue the fight without him, they're mostly meant for Law to hear. One of Zephyr's biggest regrets, after all, is not telling the ones he loves how much they meant to him before it was too late. Whether he knows Law might be listening to his words is unclear, but it's likely he speaks them hoping that he might hear them. Considering how few words Law and Zephyr get to exchange, it's natural that these words live on with Law long past Zephyr's death. He runs them over in his head, tries to understand their meaning, and over the course of the game, he lives by them. From that point on, Law faces his regrets head on and tries to fight despite his past, just like his father said to do, trying his best not to make the same mistakes over and over again. As he travels, he thinks about his reasons for fighting and what it is he wants to protect, what it is that he cares about. All of that is spurred on by Zephyr's words. In essence, Zephyr becomes his lodestar, guiding him on and helping him to find a new purpose. Thus, we can finally talk about the moment that Law stops Rinwell in Nias. This scene is truly the turning point for both Law and Rinwell. For Law, it is the proof that he is living by his father's words, the spark of his new purpose. In the moment, he doesn't know exactly what he's doing when he jumps in front of Rinwell's art. However, when he raises his arms and stands in her way, it is a clear parallel to the stance of Zephyr on the execution platform. In this moment, he embodies his father's words. He stands in the way of Rinwell not because she does not deserve vengeance for all the pain she's experienced, but because he knows the purposelessness that follows the loss of hatred. And he doesn't want her to go through that like he did. More than anything, he is trying to protect her from that. He doesn't want to lose her, though he does not become conscious of that fact until much later in the game. Why is this important, you ask? Because Zephyr is Law's lodestar. Law constantly wonders what his father would have said or done, and is always asking Alphen for advice about that. But in Niez, by paralleling Zephyr, Law embodies his father's words and gains the strength of heart he needs to live by them, despite how difficult it must have been to oppose Rinwell in that moment. Thus, Law in turn becomes a guiding light for Rinwell. At first, Law's actions hurt Rinwell deeply, almost like a betrayal. Out of all of their party, Law is the one whose situation is most similar to Rinwell's. Both spent their childhood living in hiding, only to lose important family members due to the cruelty of Renan lords. They both lived in Cyslodia, both knew what it was like to live a life of secrecy and deception, and in the end, Law got his vengeance against Ganabelt. He should be the one who best understands Rinwell's situation, who would be most supportive of her getting her own vengeance against Almeidrea. Those shared experiences, however, are what stops Rinwell from killing Law as she threatens to do. Had any other one of her party members stood in her way, she'd have doubtlessly fought past them to reach Almeidrea. When it comes to Law, however, Rinwell's situation becomes more complicated. The game makes it clear how the two become close friends before Niez. They are often found at each other's sides or sharing glances during conversations and cutscenes. It's easy to see how this might have come about too, considering how much they have in common, including their close age and similar pasts. The bond the two of them form is enough that Rinwell cannot bring herself to hurt Law when it comes down to it. After all, aside from Hutol, Rinwell has no friends, and feels like no one could possibly understand her. For her to have a bond blooming with Law is incredibly meaningful. How then could she possibly kill someone who might actually understand her better than she thought any ordinary Danan could? Thus, Law successfully talks Rinwell down. Almeidrea escapes, and the two are left to reflect on their actions and to consider what they want to do going forward. When asked later, Law does not have the words to explain his actions, nor does he fully understand his own reasons for stopping Rinwell. It can be inferred that he wants to prevent her from ending up the same way that the Darkwings did, riled up by their thirst for vengeance to the point that they were prime targets for the Hollowing. In a much more metaphorical sense, Rinwell might have ended up the same once her vengeance was complete. With no more purpose, she'd have felt figuratively hollow, just like Law did. Where Law cannot put this into words, however, it is Xion who manages to do so, once Almeidrea is gone. In a twist of irony, it is the same Renan who Rinwell first resented when she first joined the party, who gives Rinwell the clearest advice.
Nobody can understand what you've been through. We can't even begin to imagine the pain you've experienced. But if hate is what has kept you going ever since that day, then let it be your strength. However, think about this. When you've had your revenge, when we've beaten Almeidrea, then what will you do?
Huh?
I'm saying you're going to have to find a way to survive once that hatred is gone. When it is, what do you plan on doing then?
I don't know. I've never thought about it before.
Almeidrea's death doesn't have to be your end too. You need a reason to live, Rinwell, not an excuse to die. Understand?
Naturally, it means a lot for Xion to be the one who tells her this. After all of the time they've spent biting each other's heads off, holding each other at a distance, for Xion to tell Rinwell that she needs to find a way to keep living is monumental. It breaks down the barrier Rinwell forced in front of Xion, makes her look past her hatred of Renans and see the human underneath. After all, if Xion is giving solid advice about Rinwell's future, she cannot be as much of an uncaring monster as she has long since thought Renans to be. The same goes for her perception of Law. On the ship headed toward Almadria, Rinwell explains about how confusing recent events have been for her, how she has seen monstrosity from Danans where she previously thought it was a Renin trait. In addition to this, she mentions Law and Shion, a former Snake Eye, and Derenin, who are both kind and compassionate despite their past actions and labels. When Alphen explains about Law's regrets regarding his father, it allows Rinwell to think more deeply about why Law stopped her from going down the same path. And in turn, she begins to think about how both Law and Shion must feel. She begins thinking empathetically about her party members, and as such, begins her journey toward overcoming hatred. Essentially, had Zephyr's words not reached Law in Sisselden, and had Law not killed Ganabelt in revenge for his father's death, Law would never have stopped Rinwell in Mies. And had Rinwell killed Almadria, she may have ended up purposeless and hollow, lost for a reason to live. But because these events happened, and because their friends are there to help them along, Law and Rinwell are able to look for new purpose in life. They are given hope. Thus we come to the question Tales of Arise asks most: what comes after? For Law and Rinwell, they both begin seeking what they have subconsciously needed all this time: purpose in life. In the case of Rinwell, in order to find purpose, she must first come to terms with her identity as a mage. This means overcoming years of internalized hatred and the belief that her magic makes her a monster, which is only made more difficult with certain NPCs and side quests calling her a monster, even when she tries to explain that she means well. And truth be told, it takes her the entire game to come close to being at peace with her magic. A lot of that comes from conversations with her friends, especially Alphen at camp. However, there is one major plot development which sparks her purpose more than anything: their foray into the Wedge. When the Wedge comes down from Lenegis, it is a mystery to the party what it is. Even Rinwell cannot tell whether it is biological or mechanical, only that it is alive. However, what she can tell is that it is rich in Danan astral energy, and that there is a voice from inside which reaches out to her alone. Rinwell follows this voice throughout the Wedge, allowing it to guide her and the party deeper in. Unlike her wary party members, she trusts it fully because she can sense it deeply. Sure enough, at the core they find a mass of Dana's astral energy, which they later come to call the Will of Dana. It emotionally affects the whole party immensely, even if they do not fully understand why. For Rinwell, however, the voice of Dana holds a much greater meaning. Her heritage as a mage and her ability to sense astral energy more precisely than others is a part of that. The voice of Dana reaches out to Rinwell first, and so Rinwell begins to believe that her being a mage is precisely what allowed them to reach its core. In essence, for the first time, her being a mage had a specific purpose. As such, she becomes more comfortable with her ability to sense astral energy throughout the latter half of the game, embracing it when the Will of Dana shows them past memories in the Forbidden Zone, and willingly reaching out to Rena's astral energy in the final dungeon in order to understand its intentions. To put it simply, by learning to empathise with other people and to reach out to them following the events in Mahog Sar, Rinwell gains the confidence to use her abilities as a mage to reach out to astral energy in much the same way. For Rinwell, her purpose becomes using her magic to help her friends save the Twin Worlds, and by extension, Shion. For the first time, she finds a way to use her magic as a force for good, instead of a tool for her hatred. As for Law, finding purpose means finding a reason to fight. This too comes from Zephyr's final speech, his words about finding what it is you couldn't bear to lose, what you want to protect with all of your might. Finding such an abstract concept is not easy, of course, especially for Law who doesn't deal well with abstracts. Stopping Rinwell, however, was the initial spark of his new purpose. The second spark occurs when they get to the Wedge. When Rinwell hears the voice in her head, Law is immediately skeptical. He has past experience of seeing astral energy and magic used for deception and deceit, most prominently in the case of Ganabelt, masking his identity in such a way that it allowed him to stab Zephyr unnoticed by any of the party. It makes sense then that he would be wary of a voice suddenly reaching out only to Rinwell, seemingly guiding her towards the Wedge, which came down from the Renin-based Lenegis. As far as he knows, it could be a part of the enemy's plan, an attack meant to harm or brainwash them. There is no way for him to know for sure what the voice or its intentions might be. Throughout the Wedge, this wariness continues, much to Rinwell's chagrin, but when they reach the centre of the Wedge and encounter Dana's will, when Rinwell falls to her knees crying, it is Law who reaches out to her first, even when he is crying too. He may not truly understand Dana's will, but the connection he feels in that moment clearly strikes a chord with him. That doesn't mean he is any less suspicious of Dana's will when it contacts them again later on. Law continues to be skeptical, more so once the idea of Ren's will controlling the Helganquil is introduced on Dake Faisal. But it is only once Rinwell explains to him her reasons for trusting Dana's will that he begins to understand her perspective and to allow himself to trust in it as well. What does this have to do with his purpose? Law is most concerned with his father's words, finding what he doesn't want to lose and what he wants to protect. He wants to find his reason for fighting. Through both the events regarding astral wills and his conversations with Alphen at camp, it is clear that Law wants to protect and look out for Rinwell. He wants to encourage her when he sees her trying her hardest, and he wants to prevent her from being hurt or brainwashed by the astral energy in the Wedge and later on. To put it simply, he doesn't want to lose her. Rinwell is one of Law's reasons for fighting. Naturally, Law becomes just as important to Rinwell as she is to him. After explaining her newfound purpose and her connection with Dana's will, Law understands her perspective and thanks her for sharing it with him. For Rinwell, that moment is revolutionary. For the first time in years, there is someone who understands her, despite her outlier status as the last Danan mage. Law doesn't see her as a monster like most Danans would, and his reasons for being skeptical of Dana's will were not born out of a rejection of astral energy or magic. Rather, he accepts her being a mage as a part of her, and he actively tries to understand her experience of the world. The fact that he cares so deeply for her must be incredibly meaningful to her, considering how she started off. With this in mind, it is clear that the bond between the two of them is incredibly strong by the end of the game. They encourage each other as they work towards their new purposes. Law fights with all his might for the sake of his own will, to protect those he cares about, and Rinwell works hard to use her magic as a force for good rather than hate, without the other there to guide them out of their darkest moments and to encourage them toward a brighter future. They'd both still be trapped in their regrets and purposelessness, still caught in the hold of hatred. But Law and Rinwell exemplify the same message which Tales of Arise aims to convey. With friends to rely on and people you care about supporting you, anyone can move on from their past regrets and find hope in the future. But that's just my opinion. To be honest, there is so much more I could say about Law and Rinwell, but this video is far too long as it is. Maybe someday I'll make another video to gush about them some more. Until then, feel free to let me know down below what your thoughts are on Law and Rinwell. I'd love to hear any theories or opinions you have. I feel like there's been a lack of discussion online about Tales of Arise, despite how well it sold, so I'd definitely be interested in hearing other people's thoughts. If you'd like to see more analysis content, I have several videos on my channel that might interest you. My Hootle analysis from last year, yes, you heard that right. It's actually a surprisingly sincere analysis of his character and symbolism if you're interested in that. I also have an excessively long Tales of Arise review video with some analytical elements that you might be curious about if you want to know what I thought about the game in general. Or if you're interested in other Tales games, I have analyses for both Tales of Zestiria and Tales of Vesperia. I'll definitely be making more analysis content in the future too, although I can't guarantee how regular those uploads will be. It's also been a while since my last analysis, so if you've waited all that time, thank you for your patience and for sticking with me. To be honest, I've had a lot of trouble writing this analysis, so I'm glad to have finally finished it so I can share it. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a great day, night, or whatever the time it is for you. And I'll see you next time.
All this snow reminds me of when we first met, Law.
Jeez, Alphen, you're gonna make me blush over here.
I remember. I almost blew you into a million pieces.
Well, that got dark fast.